Sonic Frontiers isn't just my personal favorite game in the franchise, but has successfully dethroned Sly 3 Honor Among Thieves as my favorite video game ever made. A game that I played day in and day out growing up, which also served as a wonderful send-off to my childhood hero, was usurped in the span of 10 months. That's not to say the game doesn't have its issues. Trust me, there are quite a few. Egregious pop-in, baby difficulty that doesn't encourage much critical thinking from the player, too much reliance on automation, not as much replayability as seen in previous games, 2D sections, you get the gist. However, it's the heart of Frontiers that has me so glued to it. Islands that are fun to traverse and explore, an engaging gameplay loop that allows for optimization and style of play, fun combat, a fantastic soundtrack, high spectacle, and a beautifully written story. Even with all the jank, Frontiers manages to provide an enjoyable experience of blind fun every time I revisit it, even if it's weighed down by a general lack of polish. So understandably, as we started nearing the release window for Update 3, my excitement was through the roof. Update 1 had managed to bring a ton of replayability to the game that wasn't there before, and Update 2 managed to do not only that, but also refine the game's movement with added physics in both the open zone and cyberspace, and a broken to all hell but immensely fun spin dash. Prior to Update 2, one of my biggest criticisms of Frontiers was how unenjoyable it felt playing through the cyberspace stages, because of how stiff it felt controlling Sonic. A huge con of the game, just completely gone with the release of the second update. So we could only imagine how big Update 3, now dubbed the Final Horizon, was going to be to the overall quality of the game. While I personally didn't mind the original climax to Frontiers, many people were right to be disappointed by it since it was painfully easy to tell just how rushed the entire thing was. The Final Horizon promised not only a completely revamped finale to properly conclude such an epic journey, but also 3 new, entirely playable characters who haven't been accessible in a mainline game since 2006. Along with new challenges. Many, including myself, firmly believe that if this update delivered, it would propel Frontiers to a honest 10 out of 10, and relieve it of its major issues. Well, it's now been 10 days since we've gotten our hands on the Final Horizon, so did it live up to my expectations? Well, it's complicated. See, there are some things I really love about the Final Horizon, but to say it can be a mixed bag is a little bit of an understatement. This is, without a doubt, the most divided I've ever seen the fandom. Regardless of who you go to for a verdict, you'll likely get a different answer every time. Some love it, others think it's complete garbage, but most are kinda split like me. At the end of the day, I'm glad we got this update since I like a lot of what's here, and it is free. It doesn't take away anything from the base game, but instead, it only adds more content, which to me is always a plus. More things to do in a video game that doesn't affect the enjoyment of the base experience is hardly anything to get mad at, and only footage justifies the $60 I spent at launch. The devs clearly worked hard and tried their best to implement as much fan feedback as they could, and it's clear they didn't have the biggest budget in the world to do so. With that said though, it's important to keep in mind that new content added isn't immune to criticism, and at the end of the day, it's constructive feedback that allows the team to improve going forward, however harsh it may end up being. Hell, the fandom tearing Sonic Forces to pieces is how we even got a game like Frontiers to begin with. There's a lot I want to talk about regarding the Final Horizon, but before we start, please consider liking the video if you enjoy, and maybe consider subscribing for future content involving this blue blur. Trust me, I hate begging for likes and subs as much as you do watching it, but lately my videos haven't been doing the best, and I'm really trying harder than ever before to boost the channel's success and deliver daily quality content. So any boost in the algorithm you can provide is more than appreciated. That said, let's not waste any more time and delve into the final update for Sonic Frontiers. To start off positive, I really like how all of the new content was implemented into the base game. When I heard the final boss was getting a revamp, I was excited, but at the same time, a little worried. You see, despite its issues, I really enjoyed the original finale of Frontiers for its raw emotion and narrative offerings. Even if the actual gameplay of the bosses were underwhelming, I didn't want them to be completely wiped from the game entirely. Not just because I didn't have a problem with them, but also for the sake of game preservation. I'm not the biggest fan of live service models for this reason. Sure, it's cool to get new stuff added to a game to always keep the experience fresh and evolving, but because the game itself is constantly changing, certain things like maps, characters, game modes, or whatever becomes completely inaccessible. By the time a year has passed, the game you were initially playing is something else entirely. Want a recent example? Since Call of Duty is one of the games I cover on this channel, just look at the original Warzone. Soon, all of the servers on that game are going to shut down completely. All of the memories you had playing Verdansk with your buddies, all the countless operators you bought, all of that is gone, forever lost to time. Warzone still exists in the form of Warzone 2, and it still plays similarly, but it'll never quite be the same as when you started playing the first one. Back in my day, on the PS2, holy shit, I'm getting old. When you purchased a game and put it in your console, everything on that disc will forever be playable. No microtransaction bullshit, no constant updates, no, the content you paid for at launch is yours to keep. At any moment, I can open my PS2 and pop Shadow the Hedgehog in there, and every part of the story, every extra unlockable, all the countless swearing is safely preserved until the end of time. But the more games these days lean towards digital updates, the less likely of a reality that becomes, and I fear that Sonic was starting to fall into the same trap by using a similar model. Technically it already has, since in the year 2072, if consoles aren't backwards compatible and the servers for current gen have shut down, it will literally be physically impossible to play the game with all these cool updates. But at the very least, it isn't rewriting history, since it leaves the base experience completely alone. The OG final boss is still there, and so is the OG Hour Annals and the story and gameplay within it. The Final Horizon as a package is a completely optional version of the island you can access by entering through this portal, which is a very cool Sonic movie reference. I'm surprised I'm the only one who freaked out about that. But yeah, that's really all I wanted to praise out the gate before we got into the nitty gritty. Sorry for the live service tangent, but it's something I've grown to severely dislike about modern gaming, and I'm glad Sonic Team preserved the original ending and kept everyone in mind. Now let's get into the meat of this update. The 3 new playable characters. Amy Rose, Knuckles the Echidna, and Miles Tells Prower. If any of you are even remotely familiar with this channel, you know how much of an adventure fanboy I am, as well as my overall love for the gameplay and writing of the 2000s era of Sonic. So yes, you've probably guessed right, I fucking love the fact that these guys are playable once again. Sonic Team has finally ignored the brain-dead critics and actually listened to the fans. Multiple playable characters in Sonic only add more variety to the gameplay and can lead to some really fun alternate playstyles. And also, more importantly, these characters are in the hearts of millions of Sonic fans, with me obviously being no exception, so they deserve to shed a spotlight with our beloved hero and have some agency in the games he's a part of. That's actually what we got here, even if it's brief. You see, all 3 of these characters aren't playable in the base game, they're only accessible on this specific version of Our Annals Island. I can see some people finding this disappointing, but I completely understand it. None of the other islands were made for these characters in mind, so they'd be able to easily cheese Sonic's platforming. I don't mind having them restricted to one island. I mean, really? I'm just glad they're here at all. And their inclusion shows to me that Sonic Team have heard our feedback, and the next game would be built from the ground up with these characters in mind. Amy is by far my favorite to play out of these 3. Much like Origins, she plays very similarly to Sonic, but with enough moves to make her stand out, and her platforming is really fun. Now, there has been some discourse over how heavily tarot cards are featured in her moveset, and I'm 2 ways about it. On one hand, the hammer is too iconic to take a back seat, and it's obvious how hard Sonic Team is trying to highlight her fortune reading hobby. Due to 2010s, it was pretty clear that no one at SEGA knew how to make Amy stand out apart from her crush on Sonic, which the adventure games did astoundingly well but for some reason was forgotten about. So now they're taking what was a neat character trait and making it her whole personality. I don't have a problem with SEGA drawing more attention to it to highlight other aspects of the character, since that's definitely not a bad thing. In fact, Sonic Origins and IDW drew attention to it in a way that felt natural. But every mention of it in Frontiers for whatever reason just feels really forced. On the other hand though, I think the tarot cards are cool, and I like their animations. They're not inherently bad, I just think going forward, Amy's moveset should be split equally between the tarot cards and her Pico Pico hammer. Maybe have the hammer be used strictly for combat and the cards offer more mobility. Despite the card debacle, I love playing as Amy. Knuckles on the other hand, oh boy. You've heard right, Knuckles is easily the worst of these 3 characters. It's ironic because everyone else was mainly looking forward to playing this character because of the game's combat, but because I was mainly interested in trying out Tails and Amy, I wasn't really let down. I'll say this, Knuckles isn't awful. A lot of people are really playing up how bad he is, but he can honestly be a fun character to play once you get used to him and unlock more of his moveset. To start with the positives, his wall climbing isn't bad at all. In fact, it was pretty smooth during my experience. Somewhat disappointed that he can only climb on specific surfaces instead of everything like he did back in the older games. And while I can understand that, you have to understand giving Knuckles the ability to climb on every structure would completely break the fucking game. Hell, even restricting him to specific platforms still isn't enough to stop him from cheesing certain platforming obstacles. This was a smart decision on the devs' part, and I can understand how tight their hands were here. What is unacceptable is his glide. What did they do to his glide? I don't really care about the slight delay that occurs before you break into one. If anything, it can help you properly adjust yourself in the air, even if I'd prefer how straightforward it was in Adventure. But you see, that's not the main problem. No, controlling this man's glide is like driving a speeding car going 300 on the interstate. It's so hard to keep this motherfucker in a straight line, and there's no reason it should be like this. In an adventure, if you want to glide somewhere, it was smooth as butter. Here, as Game Apologists put it, how the fuck did they add ice physics in the air? This makes specific platforming requiring his glide an absolute chore. My friend, The Mist, commented on one of my videos that he had such a tough time with it, he had to switch his game to easy. That's insane! Probably the biggest disappointment of this character is the combat. Knuckles is the powerhouse of Team Sonic. He's literally named Knuckles. And while he's more proficient in combat than say Tails or Amy, he's nothing to write home about, and honestly, Sonic has way better moves anyways. He especially becomes a more appealing option when you consider that every new character starts off with 0 stats on an island full of crazy difficult guardians. Tails is a step above Knuckles. His flight is still a little awkward, but it's nowhere near as bad as the glide, and he has some fun moves. However, with all of that, I was still a little underwhelmed when I first started using him, especially since he's the only character to not have a homing attack. But ladies and gentlemen, that was before I unlocked the Cyclone boost. Yes, the Cyclone from SA2 returns, and it is completely, without a shadow of a doubt, the most fuck-busted thing in the game. More busted than Knuckles' aerial traversal, his boom glitch, the spin dash, all of it. With the Cyclone, you can fly however high you want to in the air, with the only limitation being your boost gauge. But wait a minute, you might say. Can't you just get an infinite boost by using the side loop? Yes. Yes, you can. There are no limits. You can skip pretty much every one of Tails' platforming sections with this boost. It's not that hard to get, only costing 30 skill points, and it's fucked. I kind of love how broken it is, but I'd be lying if I said this is good game design, even if it is really fun. The only thing that can stop you are obstacles randomly appearing in front of your plane. Which brings me to the next section of this review, the Pop-in. Holy shit. Look, when I first played Frontiers, I didn't really care too much about the Pop-in. Yeah, it was slightly immersion breaking, but at the same time, it was easy to ignore. The insane speed of the spin dash made it a little more prevalent, but it was nothing crazy. Here? I mean, look at this shit! The pop-in for this version of our annals is downright unacceptable, and the fact that these characters have the spin dash, or in Tails' case, the Cyclone boost, makes it even more noticeable. My guess as to why it's especially bad here is this island easily contains the most amount of platforming obstacles, which makes sense, and I can understand that these devs are doing the best they can with the pocket change and stick of bubblegum SEGA provided to make this game, but bottom line, this is downright, without a shadow of a doubt, inexcusable for a fully priced mainline game of one of the world's most beloved gaming franchises in the year 2023. This is embarrassing, and can really break immersion. I can't believe we're 3 major updates in, and what everyone can agree is the most universally criticized part of the game's presentation was never once prioritized. Not much to say, I really hope at least one more patch addresses this. You can't tell me fixing this issue is beyond SEGA's capabilities when we live in a world where open world games like Red Dead Redemption 2, Horizon, Infamous Second Son, just to name a few, have long preceded this release. I don't care whose fault it is, this is unacceptable, and I believe you are actively hurting this franchise if you try to defend it. With that brief rant over, let's get back to the actual gameplay. Surprisingly, Sonic gets a lot to do in this update, probably more so than the new characters. Much like the island before this one, there are several giant towers you must climb. Honestly, the tower climbing in Ray Island was easily my favorite bits of platforming in the entire game, so to bring those back, except bigger and more complex, sounds like a home run. Boy, was I blissfully unaware of how miserable I'd be climbing them. After a while, I finally got at my complete thoughts on how I feel. Look, I agree with the tower levels on one thing. This is easily the best platforming in the game, and it's not even close. There's rarely any automation, there's a lot of brilliant level design here, and you have to think critically and are rewarded for playing well. But, and there is a but to this, these towers are way too fucking punishing. You see, unlike the ones in Rhea, there are no checkpoints here. If you fall, you fall. So you're basically playing a miniature version of Only Up. I can't speak for that game, but here my friend, there's some cheap ass bullshit scattered throughout otherwise really good platforming. If you mess up once, just once, you've got to do everything all over again. These tower climbs can last between 3 to 5 minutes, and while that may not sound like a lot, it feels like an eternity when you're actually playing it. This opens up the larger issue of the Final Horizon that I've been kind of dancing around for the sake of keeping this video organized as best I can. the difficulty. This is the hardest time I've ever had with a Sonic game, and it's not even funny. Harder than the 2000s era, any of the classic games, this update is crazy. It's especially jarring since the base game is so easy to the point where it's mindless, even if you have it set to hard. All of our complaints about the base game being too easy is obviously what led to Sonic Team taking our feedback and making a Sonic Souls-like, and because of that, a common rebuttal Sonic fans who enjoy this update like to use is, well, didn't you ask for more difficulty? Yes, we did. While we're on the topic, you know what else we asked for? A port of Sonic Colors. In fact, speaking of ports, we also wanted a port of each of the classic games for better convenience. Also, for the longest time, we've been begging for a purely animated Sonic show featuring most of the cast. And you know what? We got all three of those things. Now, how would you feel if I sat back and told you you're not allowed to criticize any of what I just mentioned because you asked for it? Just because we got a request granted doesn't mean we can't criticize the execution of said request. Another rebuttal that most SonicTubers have already addressed is the legendary skill issue allegations. And you know what? They have a point. I'm not good at the majority of video games I play, this update included. Resident Evil Code Veronica X, Fury, Black Ops 4 Zombies, just to name a few off the top of my head, are games I'm not ashamed of admitting have traded turns in kicking my ass. Yet, I love all of them. Why? Because while they may offer a healthy degree of challenge, at the same time, they're fun. You know what's not fun? Playing as characters with zero unlocked stats in an island filled with top-level bullet hell guardians, being punished for missing a bullshit jump and having all of your progress erased, and most of all, the trials. I've been saving my rage especially for these. After successfully climbing each tower, you'll have to complete one of 5 trials to progress through the story. These are basically custom-made challenges meant to test your skill. Most people are pretty forgiving when it comes to these and can actually find some fun to be had. Not me. Personally, these are absolute fucking garbage. These made my experience with the new update go from slightly aggravating to downright rage-inducing. Trial 1 is simple. You have level 1 stats and you have to beat several sped up enemies. Like I said, I'm not the greatest at video games, so I'm probably the only one who had trouble here, but I eventually powered through it. While it was very annoying, it wasn't the worst thing I'd ever seen. Then I go to Trial 2, and it's here where I had my first ever rage quit on a Sonic game. Here, you have to side loop 4 of these flower looking motherfuckers and damage them while they're exposed. You have 2 minutes to do this, and trying to go about this the normal way is nearly impossible. It's doable, but just very, very barely. And it's the most tedious, repetitive thing in the world. That's until I gave up and decided to watch someone else do it when I figured out the solution is to completely cheese the trial by abusing the parry. Once you figure that out, it's a cakewalk. This is not how you approach difficulty. Confusing the player until they start spamming a technique isn't good game design. It's cheap and fucking annoying. You want to know the icing on the cake though? The next 2 trials are piss easy. On the 3rd, you just parry and attack 1 pair of coyotes, and on the 4th, you get 10 minutes to fight a single level 1 ninja slightly sped up. The difficulty fluctuation is so sporadic in this update, it's insane. But not as insane as the 5th and final trial. Up until now, while the trials were terrible, they weren't irredeemable. Trial 2 was bullshit, Trial 1 was slightly annoying, and the last 2 were strangely easy. Whatever. What comes next is something I still can't believe made it into the final game. In order to fight the final boss, the thing you downloaded this damn update for to begin with, you have one final test. You have to fight Giganto, Wyvern, and Knight consecutively with no stats, a parry that now has to be timed expertly, and 400 rings shed across all 3 fights. This is fucking sadistic. What do I even say? The perfect parry is something we've been wanting for a long time. The normal endless parry makes the base game way too easy. But to introduce that mechanic here, with no training, and bosses that weren't designed for it, is fucked. It should be illegal. This isn't a typical parry where there's an indicator before an attack or you get a brief window to do it. There's no indicator. And if you're playing on normal or hard, this shit has to be exact. I'm talking the same frame as when the attack lands. In bosses like Wyvern, where the attack slows down and doesn't physically connect with your body until you get hit, you have to guess when the moment to parry is. If you're a frame off, you take the hit and have to watch as your ring count withers away, giving you less time to fight the full-length fight after. I'm glad Kishimoto listened to us, and I'm hopeful we'll see things like crazy platforming and a perfect parry implemented properly in the next game. But here, This is the worst thing I've ever played in a Sonic game. Hands down. I'd be slightly more forgiving if you didn't have to sit through the QTE animations and Titan death scenes and you get to start each fight as Supersonic. Nope. You've got to climb each Titan fully and watch nearly every cutscene, making this challenge more repetitive and lengthy than it needed to be. The only way to make this fair is to switch it to easy, since you get a longer parry window. It's still hard, but at least it's a doable challenge. I cannot say the same for normal and hard. And for all of you who are like, oh, just switch it to easy. I agree, that's the best advice. But guys, I shouldn't have to change difficulties mid-run just to make something fair. That's slapping duct tape over blatantly awful game design. This would have worked great as an optional side challenge that gives you a cool reward, but as a mandatory obstacle, it's fucking garbage. But once you've completed that, you've apparently earned the right to have a satisfying conclusion to the game you've invested at least 17 hours in. Now, major spoiler warning ahead. This final boss is one that should be experienced blind, and it's something you'll never be able to truly appreciate if you don't get to see it for yourself first. After this fight, I'm going to talk about the story, so if you want to remain spoiler-free, use the timestamps below to skip to the conclusion of the video. You have been warned. At first, the climax proceeds normally. You have to fight Vanilla Supreme again, which serves as phase 1 of the new fight. That's a change I really love. This version of Supreme is severely underwhelming as a final boss, but as phase 1 of a larger fight, he's actually pretty cool. And him being a severely underpowered Giganto clone is more appropriate. I'm of the opinion that the original end fight wasn't underwhelming, was actually a cool extra challenge, but having to fight OG Supreme beforehand with no satisfying cool battle only amplified everyone's disappointment. But here, the end fight is completely redone. Now rolling up on Earth, the end takes control of the Supreme Titan, giving it a creepy, grotesque new form to use as its avatar. And it looks fucking sick. To keep the odds even, Sonic undergoes a transformation of his own into a new form, Super Sonic 2. I hate that name, since it's very generic and sounds dumb. I would have much preferred something like Corrupted Sonic, but Super Sonic 2 is what it's named in the files, and everyone seems to be calling it that, so whatever. Anyways, this form makes Sonic's attack stronger and gives him the perfect parry, which requires exact timing but is able to deflect any attack. Gameplay-wise, this fight is really good. You have to remove the end's cord by doing a sidestep to change your target, and once you do that, you basically beat the fuck out of him all while parrying his orbs. This is by far the best boss fight in the game since you actually have to pay attention and engage with the battle instead of button mashing. Its only drawbacks are two things. One, the camera is not your friend here, constantly blocking your view of trees and just being janky. Two, the game does an awful job at communicating what you have to do. That sidestep move I mentioned is never taught to you once in the game, and the only reason I know about it is because I play the game a lot and I watch other people play the game a lot, so I knew about the knight strategy. There's also a point when you have to side loop his gun port, and because there's nothing there, no one would think you have to do a side loop there. The fight isn't perfect, but it's definitely engaging, and where it shines the most is its raw spectacle. Some of the coolest shit in the series occurs here. Sonic is not holding back in this battle. He's crushing Supreme with a snap of his finger, or ordering him. He's just raw as fuck. The end also has some cool animations where he'll crawl after you like a spider and attempt to crush you. It's sick. But nothing, and I mean nothing, tops the finale where Sonic goes all out and evolves into a new form, Cyber Sonic, before he's shot out of Supreme's gun and annihilates both the Titan and the creature controlling it. Bad ass. This is a very epic encounter, and the orchestra version of I'm Here, along with the remix performed by the one and only Kellen Quinn, brings it all home. It somehow makes the suffering you endured to get here worth it. Before we completely wrap up, thank god I've been scripting for 5 hours now, I want to dedicate a segment to the story. If you're wondering what my thoughts are about the new cyber stages, I have not played them. I know, professional YouTuber, am I right? Look, I will eventually, but if I'm being honest, I don't really care too much for the cyberspace in this game. I mainly downloaded this update for the story, playable characters, updated hour annals, and the final boss, and that's all I really want to talk about. They look cool though, however, I'm not a fan of how even the new cyberspace stages have Pop-in. Come on, SEGA. Anyways, the start to this story is definitely its weakest part. Sonic is just running through our annals when Sage and Eggman suddenly appear, and the form of the two informs the Hedgehog of a second possibility they could try that she hadn't even considered. And that's returning Sonic's friends back to the digitized state at the expense of giving him a cyber corruption again, and having them look for the emeralds while Sonic works his way to the Ancient Trials to not just drive off the corruption, but channel it into a new power. There's multiple issues here. One, how is this not the first idea Sage thought of? This seems like a lot more of a better plan than just winging it in the base game. Second, when did Sage get this type of power? It's understandable she can interact with the island's technology since she's in its system and she's a sentient AI after all. But how can she undo whatever fucking ritual Sonic's friends did just like that? It just feels very contrived. Lastly, Sonic should be dead. The cyber corruption was at a stage where it had him split between dimensions, and theoretically, if he got that back, he should be in the same state, or at least close to it. Not only that, he never shows any sign of suffering from it throughout the entire update except for briefly mentioning it once or twice. I understand the difficult position the writers were in since they had to retcon an entire island's worth of story to give players a more satisfying conclusion, but in that case, they should have probably erased Raya Island from canon. I love that section, tone-wise, gameplay-wise, and story-wise, but if ignoring it would have allowed this story to make more sense, I think I would have preferred that. Also, I lied, just one last nitpick, but part of what makes alternate endings in games so appealing is due to the consequences of your choice and how those two paths deviate in meaningful ways. Here, there's nothing you do as a player that gives Sage the idea she has, it just sort of happens. And then later, with the end, there's no explanation as to why it comes to Earth this time instead of staying in space. Nothing changes in the story that results in a different outcome, it just sorta happens. This entire sequence feels more like a revision of a flawed script more than it does an alternate sequence of events that lead to a better outcome, which slightly takes away from the magic of divergent paths in video game stories. Nitpick, I know. Still want to mention it. What mainly steals the show of the Final Horizon stories are these characters. They are handled expertly well in the base game, and they're no different here. Amy is probably the best characterized out of the three. Passionate, caring, but determined as always. Huge shout out to Cindy Robinson, who kills it as Amy here. The entire voice cast is giving it their all in this update, but Cindy's performance really stands out. I wasn't big on her Amy before, but the base game of Frontier started changing my mind, and this update solidified her as a great Amy to me. Knuckles has also done pretty well, being strong-willed and not too patient. Though I do have a small nitpick, and that's his rivalry with Sonic. Hear me out, I love the fact these two are being acknowledged as friendly rivals again, and I love the chemistry in the base game. Here though, the rivalry seems a little too forced. Like, every single time Knuckles refers to Sonic, it's some sort of tease, and he even fires shots at him when talking to Tails and Amy, and it makes him come off as a little too desperate of one-upping Sonic and maybe even a little jealous. I get that's not what the writers were going for, it just comes off that way. Usually it's Sonic teasing Knuckles, not the other way around, which fits for someone who's nonchalant and cocky versus another who's usually more serious and straightforward. Not saying Knuckles shouldn't tease Sonic, but having him do it excessively just seems a tad out of character. Tails is another character who's fine in the surface level, but I have slight issues with. His arc was amazing in the base game, since after he came to realize he needs to push himself harder to become a hero in his own right, like his idol, he became more determined and assertive. It was refreshing and showed how far his character had come over the years. Here though, he's back to being unsure of himself and needs a pep talk from Knuckles to keep his head straight. I like that scene, I really do, but it feels inconsistent with how cool and brave he became at the end of Raya Island. Aside from these small nitpicks, the characters are done mostly well, and Sonic's dialogue this time around is much more witty, having a bit more sass, which I'm a huge fan of. Sage and Dr. Eggman are great here too. What I certainly wasn't expecting with the Final Horizon was to get more backstory in the Titan pilots, as well as further clarification of the Starfall Islands overall. Honestly, learning this new info was pretty satisfying, and it was neat getting to know the personalities of each Titan pilot and how they represent each character. The first sharing Amy's compassion, the second sharing Knuckles' pride, the third sharing Tails' technological prowess, and the fourth sharing Sonic's heroism. It's theorized that Master King, the former leader of this ancient civilization, is supposed to represent Eggman, since they're both amazing engineers. It was very nice finally having closure on a lot of the lingering questions from the base game, as well as new mysteries to keep us speculating into the next game. Jumping ahead to the climax, everyone has collected each of the emeralds, and Sonic flies out to confront the end. I really appreciate how in the base game, it was Sage who caught Eggman admiring Sonic, while here, it's Eggman who catches Sage doing so. Like father, like daughter. The fight with Supreme plays out like normal, but afterward, the end arrives to take control of Supreme. Real quick, I find it stupid how the supernatural embodiment of death just shoots out an auxiliary core to possess the Titan. That aside, I really love Supreme's transformation. While these Titans were formidable opponents, they were still honorable and noble warriors determined to defend their sacred land. To see the highest ranking of these Titans stripped of all nobility and twisted into this feral, nightmarish freak of nature really hypes up the threat of this antagonist. Sonic then goes Supersonic 2, and like I already mentioned, I hate that name, but not just because it sounds dumb. Though that too. No, but the name Supersonic 2 implies an evolution of the previous form, which is not what this is. Outside of the ancients containing the emeralds, the energy of cyberspace has nothing to do with the energy of chaos, making this more of a power enhancement as opposed to an evolution. If anything, this new form is more of a prelude to an entirely separate form, Cybersonic, so calling it Supersonic 2 is really dumb. Hypersonic is honestly more deserving of the name since it's basically Supersonic but on another level. Anyways, Sonic clowns on the end and Eggman joins the battle. I'll admit, after years of generic Sonic vs Eggman stories, it was really hype seeing these two join in battle out of a desperate alliance. What's also cool is seeing Sonic's friends actually contribute and help defend Eggman so they can properly load Supreme's gun. Cool shit. My one complaint of this fight is we missed out completely on the end's monologue from the original ending. Not only was it chilling, but it gave more clarification as to what exactly this creature was. I think a newer monologue would have gone hard with this battle. Anyway, Sonic enters his new form and wrecks the end. One drawback of this ending, aside from the emotional and chilling dialogue of the original final boss, is the completion of Sage's arc. Throughout the game, her color is constantly shifting between red and blue, signifying her internal struggle between good and evil. On the nose, but emotionally gripping. That all ends when she sacrifices herself to save the world, finally turning completely good before she's taken out. A satisfying emotional character journey. Here, the camera pans down and she's just blue. No character moment, no sacrifice, she's just blue now. She did raise the shield to defend Eggman, but I mean, that was just to protect her father, something she's been doing since the start of the game. I think the writers didn't want Sage becoming fully good this time around so they can use her as an antagonist for future games and maybe give her the same arc but one that spans across multiple titles. I'm fine with that, but at least have her still switching colors. Trust me, I was very happy to see Sage come away from this unscathed with no ambiguity surrounding her return. I just feel like a lot of the emotional weight of the original ending was left out, which brings me to my next point. I'm not going to have some crazy hot take like, the original ending was astronomically better or something like that. This ending fucking rocks. It's more climactic, has more spectacle, and is way more rewarding gameplay-wise. But story-wise, I do prefer the original. The raw emotion of Sonic and Sage doing everything they can to stop the end, along with the latter's ultimate sacrifice, was beautiful. Seeing Eggman alone and grieving, followed up shortly by Dear Father, still tugs at my heartstrings. I'll never forget how blown away I was when those credits first rolled. This ending, at least emotionally, isn't quite as effective. Still, really fucking cool, and leagues better than the original concerning gameplay. And that about wraps up my thoughts on the Final Horizon. You might think I hate this update of how critical I was, but no, not really. Multiple playable characters are fun, even if Knuckles needs some tweaking. The new version of Outer Annals is fun to play through once the characters are maxed out. The platforming in the towers is promising for what's to come, and that final boss was wicked. It's not sunshine and rainbows, unfortunately. The new Guardians are insufferable to fight, the towers not having checkpoints make them unreasonably difficult, the trials are absolute garbage, and the ending is a slight narrative downgrade. But regardless of what worked and what didn't, one thing is explicitly clear. Sonic Team cares about our feedback. What this update was is everything we wanted crammed into a single revamped island, and while it can be argued if any of it was implemented well, it shows a considerable effort on the devs' part to please fans, and I'm grateful for it. There was some stuff I really liked, and it was free, and didn't ruin anything about the base game considering it's entirely optional. A lot of this was for Sonic Team to test a lot of fan-demanded features and to hopefully refine them with the feedback they get from this update. I hope they listen to the right people. I hope the difficulty is the perfect balance between fun and challenging, I hope the characters next time around play better, and I hope the bar is raised even further. Sure, this update had its problems, but I do think its release was completely necessary to not only set the stage forward, but give Sonic Frontiers the conclusion it deserves.